Hi, I'm John Scholl, the Bishop for the Baltimore-Washington Conference, and I welcome you back to the Discipler Group. We're so glad that you make time in your schedules to continue to strengthen your leadership and to gather with colleagues. We're going to begin a new series in the Discipler Group about leadership. And over these next 3 sessions, we're going to talk with one another about leadership and particularly adaptive leadership as we face the adaptive spiritual challenges within the church. We know that things are changing all around us, whether it's in the culture, whether it's in business, whether it's in the church, in the community. And it calls for a special leadership that's able to work with all of this change and help move people in a direction. Today, we're going to look at some of the biblical imperatives for leadership, and particularly for leading change. Today, we have with us Reverend Dr. David Cooney, the Bishop's Assistant for Leadership Development. David oversees all leadership development here in the Baltimore-Washington Conference, and we're blessed by his leadership. So I welcome now David Cooney as he shares with you about leadership. Again, thank you for coming. We're glad that you continue to give of yourself to lead in the Baltimore-Washington Conference.
Good morning. My name is David Cooney. I am the Assistant to the Bishop and Director of the Grow Spiritual Leaders team. Over the last months, we have been talking and hearing about the necessity of leading our congregations in acknowledging and responding to the adaptive challenges before us. The challenges are not identical in every congregation, but every congregation has them. I want to talk today about what is meant by adaptive challenges. These are not problems to be solved. Essentially, these are the realities that compel us to learn new ways of thinking and doing if we are to fulfill the biblical mandate to make disciples for Jesus Christ. Adaptive challenges cause us to stop asking if we are doing things right, and to start asking the deeper question, are we doing the right things? An example of responding to an adaptive challenge is Peter visiting the home of Cornelius and watching God pour out the Holy Spirit on a Gentile household and saying, I now realize that I have to rethink my deeply held belief that Gentiles should be excluded from the Jesus movement. As you can see from this example, adaptive challenges are not new. This is not a 21st century phenomena or the latest buzzword of the program of the day. Adaptive challenges have confronted the faith community throughout history, and the fruit, or lack thereof, of the community at any given time correlates to how well the challenges were met. Imagine, for instance, if Peter and Paul had said, we don't care what it appears God is doing. Gentiles are not welcome. The Jerusalem church might have cheered their faithfully holding the line, and then gradually withered away. Facing challenges is not new. While not new, however, clearly the rapid shifts in society, in everything from world economics to societal norms to generational divides to life in a digital age, have intensified the challenges. We are now in a time of urgency. Urgency, because as our bishop has written to us, our present course is not capturing the hearts, minds, and imaginations of large segments of our culture. If churches are to be vital and effective at disciple making, it is imperative we respond to the challenges. So, what holds us back? The simple answer is that this kind of leadership is hard. It requires calling into question cherished ideas and long-held beliefs that are not germane to the gospel. and habits and activities and programs and ways of doing things we hold dear. As Ronald Heifetz puts it in his book, Leadership Without Easy Answers, adaptive work consists of the learning required to address conflicts in values people hold, or to diminish the gap between the values people stand for and the reality they face. This is the rub. Adaptive leadership questions not just habits, but our very beliefs and values. It names the tension between expressed values and actual behavior. It does not ask if we are effectively implementing our plans or carrying out our activities and programs in the best ways, but rather ask if these are the very things we should be doing at all. This results in some mental and emotional gyration. For instance, as already mentioned, Peter and Paul and all of the first century Jewish Christians had to swallow hard before they could choke out a word of welcome to the Gentiles. John Wesley was literally repulsed by the idea of preaching outside of a church, saying he should have thought the saving of souls almost a sin if not done in a church. He did, though, hold the value of saving souls, and the reality was that the people were in the fields and in the mines, not in the church. So, to use his words, he submitted to be more vile and preached in the open air. Not surprisingly, his text for his first outdoor sermon was, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he hath anointed me to preach good news to the poor." Robert Strawbridge determined that, though not ordained, he would serve the Lord's Supper, since no authorized clergy were around to do it, and the people should not be denied. Poor Francis Asbury protested vehemently this breach of ecclesiastical polity, but he also forcibly turned his own head to look the other way. It was hard for them, and it is hard for us and our congregations to make these shifts. These are not just intellectual shifts. They are visceral. When I grew up, I had one suit. My brothers and I each had essentially one dress-up outfit. We did not call these clothes our nice clothes or our dress clothes. We called them our church clothes, because church was the main reason we had them. It was unthinkable that we would attend worship wearing anything but our best. To this day, I am uncomfortable in worship wearing anything other than at least a shirt and tie. Silly? Maybe. But deep within me is the long-held belief that it is a sign of respect to dress up for God. Still, I know that coats and ties are actually impediments to many worship experiences today, making the experience feel too stuffy or formal, even classist for many. So for me, adaptive change means losing the tie. Just not today. Maybe for you, it means giving up lectionary preaching, or loved liturgies, or a robe, or full control of worship planning. These are some smaller, though not insignificant, new learnings. Naming the tensions between values we stand for and actual behavior might lead your congregation to make changes to the historic building you are in, because remodeling, relocation, or repurposing is needed. It might mean stopping a decades-long significant ministry that is no longer relevant, or a worship style that is no longer attracting worshipers, or surrendering a position of leadership someone else now needs to hold, or spending an endowment that is serving no one. It might even mean taking on a new identity, because a merger or reconfiguration makes more sense for the advancement of God's reign. Adaptive leaders have these kinds of conversations with the congregation. And the conversation has to be first and foremost about true values and purpose. What do we truly value? Does what we are doing demonstrate that? Don't say we value young people, but refuse to sing music young people love. Don't say we value visitors, but refuse to allow visitors to sit in our favorite seats. What do we value? And what is our purpose? What are we called by God to be and do in this place and time? Adaptive leaders ask the purpose and outcomes questions. Why? Gil Rendell explains, without clarity of purpose, we do not know to what to give ourselves. So, we settle for giving ourselves to what we know. This is the very spot at which we so often get stuck. Instead of opening ourselves to what is before us, we default to what we know. Even if we don't really like what we know. It is the old Egypt was lousy, but not nearly as lousy as the wilderness syndrome. Leaders have to help people at least imagine the promised land, to coax them through the wilderness of adaptive change. And it makes a difference because purpose does inspire. It is true, is it not, that the man who stumbles upon a treasure in a field readily and gladly sells everything in order to buy that field? That the pearl merchant who comes across the perfect pearl readily and gladly sells all his other pearls in order to buy the perfect one? Transformational leaders point to the treasure, point to the pearl, and people do get excited. After all, we are talking about changing in ways that extends God's grace to more and more people and leads to salvation for more and more of God's children. That is the very heart of our purpose. Jesus was willing to lose his life for this. The mission is that important. Transformational leadership that leads to the adaptive challenges requires clarifying a larger purpose that embodies the gospel and calls us to be claimed by that larger purpose. It means being clear about what we really value, who we really are, and whose we really are. Of course, we all understand that sounds easier than it is. Helping a congregation meet the adaptive challenges is not an easy task, and it can be unpleasant, and sometimes even ugly. Change, especially change that comes with perceived loss, is seldom easily accepted. Jesus, our number one model of a leader helping people meet adaptive challenges, strived to help the Sadducees think differently about wealth and social justice. The Pharisees think differently about law. The Zealots think differently about power, and the Herodians to think differently about loyalty. We might cynically say, yeah, and look where that got him. Of course, we might better say, and look where that got us, into right relationship to God. There is no question that transformational leaders risk stability, popularity, and failure. But the truth is that we serve a God who expects risk. The servant in the parable who faithfully and responsibly buried the talent entrusted to him was neither commended nor rewarded when he returned it to the master intact. I did not want you to protect it, the master said. I wanted you to risk it so that it might grow. The urgency of our time does not allow for timidity. To use the bishop's language, we need to lean into the stiff winds of our treasured present practices toward a renewed goal to connect and be in relationship with the poor, the nominally and non-religious people in our communities, and the legions of youth and young adults who do not find the church relevant. I'm thinking that the words Mordecai spoke to his niece Esther apply here. He said, and I am paraphrasing, "It doesn't matter if you like the idea of going to the king or not. Has it occurred to you that it is just for a time such as this that God has put you in this place?" Well, Mordecai, when it's put that way, be clear about purpose. Point to the treasure. Point to the pearl. New believers, new disciples of Christ, more lives saved. That is what is meant by meeting the adaptive challenges.